Have you ever considered what a curse truly is? It's not just a string of angry words. It's an echo of a powerful emotion, a psychic stain left on the world by a moment of intense suffering. Now imagine a death so violent, so sudden, that the victim's rage and pain are flash frozen along with his body, preserved in ice for 5,000 years, just waiting for the warmth of the modern world to thaw it out and set it free. This is the story of such a death, and the patient, frozen curse of Ötzi the Iceman. Our story begins not in the snow-swept Ötztal Alps, but in the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy. Here, in a high-tech chamber kept at a constant minus 6 degrees Celsius, lies the world's most famous glacier mummy. Our protagonist is Dr. Lena Vogel, a brilliant and rigorously skeptical molecular biologist. Lena didn't believe in curses. She believed in data, in genomes, and in the tangible stories that ancient DNA could tell. She had been granted the professional opportunity of a lifetime to lead a new project sequencing Ötzi's microbiome, to understand the very bacteria that lived and died with him. Lena was well aware of the so-called curse of the Iceman. The media loved the story, drawing lurid parallels to Tutankhamun's tomb. She knew the list of names. Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who examined the mummy with his bare hands and died in a car crash a year later. Kurt Fritz, the mountaineer who led the recovery team and was killed in an avalanche. Helmut Simon, one of the original discoverers, who fell to his death in the same area where he found the Iceman. A string of tragedies, yes, but to Lena, they were just that. Statistically predictable tragedies in a world of random chance. The lab where Lena worked was a temple of modern science, built to preserve a relic of the Stone Age. It was a place of humming machinery, gleaming stainless steel, and the constant, low hiss of the nitrogen cooling systems. The centerpiece was the viewing window into Ötzi's chamber, a thick pane of specialized glass separating the warm, living world from the frozen, dead one. Lena's work involved analyzing microscopic samples of tissue and gut content, a process that brought her into a kind of intimacy with the 5,300-year-old man that few had ever experienced. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, easily dismissed. It was a feeling of cold, but not the controlled, sterile cold of the laboratory. This was a different kind of cold, a piercing, wet, and ancient chill that seemed to cling to her clothes and skin long after she left the lab. She would feel it in the warm Bolzano evenings, a phantom shiver that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She adjusted the thermostat in her office, blaming the museum's aggressive air conditioning, refusing to acknowledge the cold's unnatural, persistent quality. Then came the sounds. During her late nights in the deserted museum, she began to hear things, first, it was a faint, guttural whisper that seemed to come from the ventilation system, a sound like a voice speaking a language of rock and wind. She would pause, listening, but it would always vanish, leaving only the familiar hum of the lab. One night, she heard it clearly, the mournful, low call of a horn, a sound that had no place in the 21st century, an echo from a time of mountains and tribes and blood. Her rational mind fought back, creating logical explanations for everything. The cold was a psychosomatic response to working with a frozen mummy. The sounds were auditory pareidolia, her brain creating patterns from the white noise of the lab's machinery. She was working too hard, sleeping too little, but she couldn't explain the recurring glitch on the security monitor. Every so often, for a single fleeting frame, the camera feed from inside Ötzi's chamber would show a dark, smudged shape on the inside of the glass, like a handprint being pressed against it from within the frozen sanctum. The first true encounter happened during the analysis of a sample taken from near the arrowhead lodged in Ötzi's left shoulder. This was the wound that killed him, the source of his final agony. As Lena prepared the DNA sequencer, the machine, a brand new, multi-million euro piece of equipment, suddenly went dead. The screen went black, the power lights extinguished. She checked the plugs, the circuit breakers. Everything was fine. An hour later, after she had given up for the night, the machine powered back on by itself, its screen displaying a single, corrupted line of code made up of strange, runic-looking symbols. That night, she had the dream. It was more vivid and real than any dream she had ever had. She wasn't watching. She was experiencing. She was running, her lungs burning with the thin, icy air of the high Alps. The ground was uneven, treacherous with rock and snow. She could feel the weight of a fur cloak, the rough leather of a quiver on her back, and she could feel a primal, heart-stopping fear. She was being hunted. The dream ended with a sudden, searing pain in her left shoulder, a blinding white light, and then an all-consuming cold as her lifeblood soaked into the snow. Lena awoke with a gasp, her own left shoulder aching with a sympathetic, phantom pain. She was drenched in a cold sweat, her heart racing. The dream had felt like a memory, an ancestral echo downloaded directly into her brain. She shook her head, trying to clear the images, the feelings. It was just a dream, her subconscious weaving together the facts she knew about Ötzi's death. But the pain in her shoulder lingered all day, a dull, persistent throb that no amount of aspirin could soothe. The curse was no longer just a list of dead men. It was becoming her own personal, waking nightmare. Her work became an obsession, a frantic race to find a scientific answer to the inexplicable events plaguing her. She focused on the arrowhead wound, convinced that the key lay in the Iceman's murder. As she worked, a strange, coppery smell began to permeate the lab. The faint but unmistakable scent of old, dried blood. No one else seemed to notice it. The cleaning staff insisted the lab was sterile. It was a phantom smell, a scent that existed only for her. A final olfactory clue from a 5,300-year-old crime scene. The incidents grew bolder. One evening, while reviewing security footage, she saw it happen. She watched herself leave the lab for a coffee break. The room was empty. Then, on the thick glass of Ötzi's chamber, a patch of frost began to form from the inside, slowly crystallizing into the clear, unmistakable shape of a hand. It was a large hand, fingers splayed, pressing against the glass, as if trying to push its way out. Lena stared, her blood turning to ice. A moment later, the frost sublimated, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She was trapped between two worlds. Her scientific mind desperately tried to construct a theory involving temperature fluctuations and unique condensation patterns. But her instincts screamed a simpler, more terrifying truth. The spirit of the man in the ice was awake, and it was aware of her. It knew she was the one poring over the details of his life, his body, his murder, and it was reaching out, not with a message of peace, but with a cold, silent rage that had been festering for millennia. The confrontation came on a Tuesday night in late November. A massive snowstorm had descended upon the Alps, blanketing Bolzano and cutting the museum off from the surrounding city. Lena had stayed late, determined to finish her analysis of the arrowhead sample, to find her rational answer and end the torment. She was alone in the building. The only sounds the humming of her lab and the howling of the wind outside. She felt a grim sense of finality, as if this night was the one where the story would finally reach its climax. At precisely 8:13 p.m., every light in the museum went out. The humming of the lab died, replaced by the emergency whine of the backup generators. But the generators powered only the essential systems. The lights in her lab remained off, plunging her into a near-total darkness, illuminated only by the cold, green glow of the instrument panels on Ötzi's chamber. Then, one by one, those green lights began to flicker and die. A single, terrifying red light began to flash. A critical temperature warning. The Iceman was beginning to thaw. A wave of profound, unnatural cold washed through the lab. A cold so intense it felt like a physical blow. It was the cold from her dream, the cold of a dying man on a mountaintop. Frost began to spiderweb across the floor and up the walls. Her breath plumed in front of her in thick, white clouds. The digital thermometer on the wall, running on a battery backup, began to drop at an alarming rate. 5 degrees, 0, -10 Celsius. The lab was becoming a freezer, and the source of the cold was the now dark chamber of the Iceman. Through the howling of the wind outside, she heard a new sound, a sound from inside the lab. It was the slow, rhythmic crunching of footsteps on ice. She froze, peering into the oppressive darkness, her heart a frantic drum in the sudden, deep silence. A figure began to resolve itself in the gloom near the mummy's chamber. It was tall, broad, and wrapped in what looked like animal furs. It was not a ghost, not a transparent apparition, but a solid, physical presence made of shadow and ice and ancient rage. The figure turned its head, and though she could see no face in the darkness, she felt its gaze lock onto her. This was not the spirit of a man seeking rest. This was the spirit of a man who had died in violence and betrayal. A hunter who had become the hunted, and his final murderous rage had been perfectly preserved. A psychic entity of pure, frozen fury. It raised an arm, and in its hand, it held the ghostly, shimmering outline of a copper-headed axe. Lena didn't scream. Her scientific mind, even in the face of absolute terror, was her last defense. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. It was a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by a power failure and extreme stress. But the killing cold was real. The frost crunching under her own feet was real. The phantom pain in her shoulder, which was now a searing, unbearable agony, was real. The entity took a step towards her, the axe held low. The confrontation was not a physical battle. It was a psychic assault. As the figure advanced, it brought the mountain with it. The sterile lab dissolved around her, replaced by a windswept, snow-covered alpine ridge under a bruised, gray sky. She felt the biting wind on her face, the crunch of snow under her feet. She was reliving his final moments, a passenger in his dying body. She saw through his eyes the figures of his attackers, the drawn bow, the glint of the flint arrowhead just before it was loosed. The pain of the arrow striking her shoulder was so real, so absolute, that she collapsed to the floor, clutching the spot. A silent scream locked in her throat. She felt the warmth of her own blood turning cold as it seeped into the snow. She felt the final, desperate struggle for breath, the rage at the betrayal, the bitterness of dying alone, and the slow, inexorable crawl of the ice as it began to claim his body, freezing his final curse into the very water molecules of his being. As she lay on the floor, convulsing in the throes of a phantom death, the figure of the Iceman stood over her. It did not strike her with its axe. It simply looked down at her, a silent, eternal sentinel of its own murder. It had not come to kill her. It had come to make her understand, to make her a witness, to force her to feel the injustice and the agony of its end. Then, as the first hint of dawn began to break through the storm clouds outside, the figure dissolved into a swirl of icy mist, and the profound cold began to recede. Security guards found her that morning, huddled on the floor of the lab, suffering from severe hypothermia and shock. The lab itself was in perfect order. The power had been restored. The temperature logs for Ötzi's chamber showed no anomalies, no fluctuations whatsoever. There was no frost on the walls, no ice on the floor. To everyone else, it looked as if Dr. Lena Vogel, a brilliant but overworked scientist, had simply suffered a complete and total psychotic break. Lena's career was over. She was institutionalized for a time, treated for post-traumatic stress and acute psychosis. She never tried to convince anyone of what she had seen. She knew it was useless. How could she explain that she had been attacked by the 5,300-year-old ghost of a murdered man? She was released, a broken woman, her scientific certainty shattered and replaced by a deep, abiding fear of the cold. She moved to a warm coastal town, as far from the mountains and the ice as she could get. The official story was that she had buckled under the pressure of the high-profile project. Her name became a quiet footnote in the story of Ötzi, another victim of the Iceman's curse, albeit a psychological one. The project was handed over to a new team of scientists who were warned of the stress involved and advised to take regular breaks. The museum tightened its security protocols, ensuring no one would ever be left alone in the building overnight again. But Lena had a secret, a single piece of evidence that she kept hidden, a truth she could share with no one. In the final, chaotic moments before the power failed, her DNA sequencer had completed its run on the arrowhead wound sample. In her haste to escape the hospital and her old life, she had taken the small data chip with her. For months, she was too terrified to look at it. But eventually, the scientist in her, the part that still craved data and answers, won out. In the safety of her new, warm apartment, she loaded the data onto her laptop. Most of it was what she expected. The Iceman's DNA, the DNA of various bacteria. But there was an anomaly. A tiny fragment of foreign human DNA mixed in with Ötzi's at the precise location of the wound. It was not ancient. It was modern, a contamination. Any other scientist would have concluded a stray skin cell from a researcher. But Lena knew. She had followed every sterile protocol perfectly, driven by a chilling hypothesis. She ran the sequence through a public genealogy database. There was no match. Then, with a trembling hand, she did something she had never done. She had her own DNA tested and uploaded the results. She ran the comparison. A perfect match. Her DNA was on the 5,300-year-old arrowhead wound of Ötzi, the Iceman. The horrifying truth crashed down upon her during the psychic assault, when she had been forced to relive his death. The connection had become physical. She had not just been a witness. She had been there, a part of her, a microscopic, biological piece of her very essence, had been pulled back through time and space and deposited onto his dying body. The curse wasn't just about killing those who disturbed him. It was about claiming them, making them a part of his eternal, frozen tragedy. She was now a living ghost, forever tethered to the man in the ice. The phantom pain in her shoulder never truly went away. On cold, rainy days, it would flare up with an agonizing intensity, And sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she would see a flicker in her eyes, a flash of ancient, cold rage that was not her own. She had tried to analyze a piece of history, and in return, a piece of it had lodged itself inside her, a microscopic arrowhead in her soul. And the curse continues. The list of the dead grows longer. A quiet string of accidents and tragedies that befall those who get too close to the Iceman's story. A journalist who wrote a skeptical book about the cursed dies of a sudden brain aneurysm. A museum director who approved a new, more invasive set of tests suffers a fatal fall down a flight of stairs. Coincidences, the world says, but Lena knows the truth. Ötzi is still on his mountain, still bleeding, still hunting his accusers, and still pulling witnesses into his cold, eternal rage. The man in the ice is more than just a perfectly preserved body. He is a perfectly preserved moment of violence, a psychic scar on the timeline of the world. He is a testament to the fact that some emotions are so powerful, some injustices so profound, that they can defy time itself. He is a reminder that when we dig up the past, we don't always find treasure or knowledge. Sometimes we find a grudge. So if you ever find yourself in a museum, staring through the glass at the remains of a long-dead human, be respectful. You are not just looking at an artifact. You are looking at what is left of a life, and perhaps what is left of a death. And you have to ask yourself, as you stare into those empty, ancient eyes, what part of that death might be staring back at you, just waiting for a moment of connection, a moment to share its cold, undying curse.